This video is brought to you in part by OmniAtlas. Feedback from viewers and patrons is one of the most important parts of my creative process, and probably the most common compliment I get is for my maps, whether they be for cities or the political maps of countries and regions. The cities I do myself, but the latter would be impossible without OmniAtlas, a free interactive historical atlas which shows step-by-step historical maps covering major world and regional events. Unlike many other historical atlases, OmniAtlas seeks to show political influence and control, not just territorial claims or legal definitions, so that means disputed territories, invading armies, rebellions, you name it. I started working with OmniAtlas years before I started my channel, and the quality of my videos would not be possible without OmniAtlas providing their pre-existing maps or their template and style guide for making my own maps. You can check out their link in the description. Now, on with the show. I think a little recap is in order. In the mid-1890s, a new ideology called Bundism emerged from the streets of Vilna in the Russian Empire. Led by a handful of formerly assimilated Jewish intellectuals, this new movement combined socialist politics with the autonomous concept then gaining popularity in neighboring Austria, calling for a federalized Russian Empire with tribal sovereignty for the empire's Jews. This was a small but integral part of the broader socialist movement in the Russian Empire, and it really exploded in popularity as the 20th century dawned. Under the guidance of the young philosopher Vladimir Medem, what was then called the General Jewish Labor Bund evolved to incorporate principles of support for the Yiddish language and opposition to Zionism. Neither of these concepts is inherent to Bundist ideology. Indeed, Berberohov had been a Bundist and a Zionist prior to the purging of Zionism from the Bund in 1901. But opposition to Zionism was viewed as a practical necessity for fear that mass Jewish emigration to the Ottoman Empire would undermine the Bundist and larger socialist cause in the Russian Empire. And being far from just talk, the Bund would prove instrumental in the defense of Jewish communities against pogroms by the proto-fascist Black Hundreds in the wake of Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War. In short, Bundism as an ideology was born out of the specific circumstances of Jews in the Russian Empire. But it didn't stay there, and just 12 years after the formation of the original Bund, it began to take root in another, very unexpected country. On the 23rd of July, 1908, a Jewish school teacher from Bulgaria named Avram Ben-Aroya arrived in the Ottoman city of Salonika. He initially took a job as a printer, but his true dream was politics. A polymath fluent in 6 languages, Ben-Aroya had been active in the Bulgarian socialist movement, through which he had discovered the ideas of Austro-Marxism, federalism, and especially Bundism, which he hoped to introduce to Southern Europe in his pamphlet The Jewish Question and Social Democracy shortly before emigrating to the Ottoman Empire. It might seem strange that Ben-Aroya would leave Bulgaria so soon after publishing a landmark political manifesto, but it was the very ideas in that manifesto that had brought him to Salonika. In contrast to most of the Ottoman Empire, it was a heavily industrialized, comparatively modern city, the wealthiest and most economically important city in the empire after Constantinople. While an organized socialist movement had yet to take shape there, trade unionism had been integral to local politics since the 1860s, so the atmosphere was ripe for it. Quite unusually, Salonika was also a predominantly Jewish city. Until recently, it had been majority Jewish, owing to the mass influx of refugees fleeing the expulsion from Spain in 1492. This also made it the epicenter of the Ladino language, an offshoot of early modern Spanish which was written in the Hebrew alphabet and incorporated a significant Hebrew vocabulary, very similar to the relationship between Yiddish and Middle High German. Ladino was also Ben-Aroya's native language, which was very convenient. Now, all of that sounds pretty much like Russian Bundism adapted for the specific Jewish subculture of the Balkans. But for Ben-Aroya, that was just a starting point. He envisioned a system of national autonomy for all minority groups in a future federated Ottoman Empire. And once the real work began on these ideas, Ben-Aroya quickly attracted lots of non-Jewish followers. But that would have to wait, because there was a third reason Ben-Aroya came to Salonika: revolution. Beginning in early July, a motley crew of nationalist military officers known as the Young Turks seized power in the Balkans and revolted against the absolute rule of Sultan Abdulhamid II. Their demands were simple: restore the Ottoman Constitution of 1876, hold free and fair elections. Bring Turkey into the 20th century. Though adamantly opposed to a constitution, Abdul Hamid was unable to resist under overwhelming pressure from the military and the public. On the 24th of July, the day after Benaroya arrived in Salonika, the Sultan gave in to the Young Turks' demands. The constitution was restored, and parliamentary elections were scheduled for the end of the year. The following months saw an explosion of new political parties and even some established movements that had been operating unofficially. The vast majority of these were socialist or liberal groups representing ethnic minorities, and the emergent Bund in Thessaloniki wasn't about to be left out. In August, Benaroya met with a collection of local Jewish trade unionists to form the Workers' Association of Salonika. Now, you may recall that there was this other mostly socialist Jewish political movement at the empire called Zionism. And yet, when elections came, the two Zionist parties of the time made no real attempt at campaigning for parliament. The truth is that the Young Turk Revolution had taken place so quickly that the vast majority of political parties were unable to organize in time for the vote, which resulted in a parliament mostly composed of independents but effectively dominated by the Committee of Union and Progress, the party of the original Young Turk revolutionaries. Even many minority politicians who might otherwise have formed their own parties instead jumped on the CUP's bandwagon, meaning that of the 4 Jewish deputies elected in 1908, 3 were initially CUP members. The Workers' Association of Salonika never had a chance, and they never would. In April 1909, Sultan Abdul Hamid attempted a military counter-coup. Ultimately, this effort was suppressed, and the Sultan was forced to abdicate in favor of his brother Mehmed V. But in their effort to crush the rebellion, the ruling CUP revealed their true colors, co-opting Muslim clerics to frame the effort against the Sultan as a religious campaign, massacring tens of thousands of Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians in Adana, and steadily suppressing attempts by their more liberal members to break away from the party and form a viable opposition movement. Initially, the Workers' Association seemed to weather the storm. In July 1909, Benaroya fought for and successfully acquired permission from the CUP to organize a separate workers' section in Salonika's local parade commemorating the first anniversary of the Young Turk Revolution. On the same day, the association merged with the Bulgarian Social Democratic faction to form the Socialist Workers' Federation, or simply Federacion, which soon began printing its own weekly newspaper and operating its own theater company, dedicated to adapting popular plays of the time into Ladino. But the Federacion's growing popularity did eventually put them in the CUP's crosshairs. In 1910, Dimitar Vlhov, a Bulgarian deputy from Salonika, switched his party affiliation to the Federacion, fueling suspicions in Constantinople that the Bulgarian-born Benaroya was a spy for the Bulgarian kingdom. The following year, the CUP shut down Federacion offices in Constantinople, arrested several party leaders, and exiled Benaroya to Serbia on the baseless assertion that he was plotting to assassinate the Sultan. But Benaroya had little to fear. He'd be back in Salonika far sooner than expected. In the autumn of 1911, just days after Benaroya's exile to Serbia, Italy invaded the Ottoman Empire, capturing Libya and the Dodecanese in short order. It was a humiliating defeat. The Ottomans were barely able to put up a defense. And seeing that weakness, Montenegro quickly declared war on the Ottomans. Within a matter of days, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece joined in, and the First Balkan War began. Just 22 days into the war, Greek forces led by Crown Prince Konstantinos occupied Salonika, or Thessaloniki in Greek. But the mood in the city was not celebratory. In spite of the growing threat posed by the Young Turks, most people in Salonika opposed annexation, mostly for economic reasons. In the largely protectionist Greek state, business owners would lose easy access to markets in the Balkan hinterland. Local banks would likely be forced to cancel debts to businesses in other parts of the empire. This had happened before when Greece annexed Thessaly in 1881. Salonika's proletariat feared mass unemployment, and the Federacion, who enjoyed the support of most workers in the city, were keenly aware of the ethnic tensions that could arise from incorporation into the far more homogeneous Greek state. Even before the outbreak of war, nationalist elements had been preemptively staking out claims on Ottoman territory through ethnic cleansing. At this point, it was at least clear that Ottoman rule in Salonika was over. But the prospect of Greek rule was especially frightening in the predominantly Jewish city. Among the three countries vying for control of the city, Jewish emancipation had already been in place for the better part of a century. In fact, Greece had been the first country in the Balkans to emancipate Jews. But there's a difference between legal rights and social toleration, and anti-Semitic attitudes were exceptionally common in Greece. While it's true that Greece had emancipated its Jewish population all the way back in 1830, the Jewish population of the independent Greek kingdom was so tiny that their citizenship wasn't perceived as a threat to a political order that still unofficially continued to equate Greekness with Orthodox Christianity and Greek as a first language. The annexation of Thessaloniki, a city larger than Athens with 8 times the Jewish population of Greece's extant territory, would necessarily challenge that self-image. As soon as Greek forces entered the city, Ottoman MP Emanuel Karaso wrote to the Zionist organization proposing the creation of a Jewish free state under international protection in Salonika. Though the Zionist organization politely declined to get involved, Karaso's proposal did attract the attention of the Austrian government, who sought to take a leadership role in the administration of a Jewish free state in order to expand their own influence and maintain the balance of power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Realistically, however, Austria's influence in the region was virtually non-existent, so they weren't really in a position to make that demand when peace talks commenced in London. Instead, Austria joined forces with Italy to secure international recognition for an independent Albania, while Karaso fled to Constantinople. Benaroya, for his part, had hoped that if any country was to take Salonika, it would be his native Bulgaria. Though it had achieved independence largely through intervention by an authoritarian and anti-Semitic Russia, Bulgaria remained an island of liberalism, where popular attitudes towards Jews were far more positive than in Greece or even Turkey. Just 3 years earlier, King Ferdinand himself had attended the opening of the new Sofia Synagogue. The Federation's own Dimitar Vlhov was Bulgarian and would soon join the Bulgarian government. Bulgaria had previously laid claim to the nearby Vardar River during its Russian-backed War of Independence, and at the outset of this war they'd fully intended to capture Salonika, only for the Greeks to get there first. But they would get another chance. Under the terms of the Treaty of London, all of the territory captured from the Ottomans in the war, other than Albania, was entrusted collectively to Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Greece, leaving it to them to partition the land on their own. When Greece and Serbia refused to withdraw from territory that they had previously promised to Bulgaria, Bulgaria declared war but was promptly defeated and ended up with even less territory. By the end of August, the issue was settled. Ottoman Salonika was now Greek Thessaloniki. As a result of the annexation, over 2,000 Jews in northern Greece emigrated to the United States. But the doomsday scenario feared by communal leaders never came to pass. Greek Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos may have been an enthusiastic nationalist and expansionist, but he was also a committed liberal Democrat who rejected religious and ethnic nationalism and went above and beyond in his treatment of Thessaloniki, offering the Jewish community a shockingly generous package of transitional privileges that he hoped would win their trust and send a message to the wider public that these people were not foreigners, but an integral part of the new Greek nation. Venizelos' plan wasn't totally successful. As Greek settlement in the city increased, anti-Semitic tensions did rise, but they never came close to the level of violence seen in the Russian Empire, Romania, or even parts of Austria. And most well-to-do middle-class Jewish families in the city became reliable supporters of Venizelos' Liberal Party. Annexation also provided an unexpected boost to the fortunes of the Federación. You'd think that leaving the Ottoman Empire would undermine the entire foundation of their ideology, but Venizelos' attitudes toward minority communities actually made the party more popular. If anything, the most outspoken opponents of the Federación were the old Greek socialists, who resented having to accept the far more popular and organized Federación into their borders. By 1915, the Federación was actually well positioned to win seats in the Greek parliament, which had never been possible under Ottoman rule. Of course, by the time those elections arrived, the Greek political landscape had been turned upside down, and any hopes of a partnership between Venizelos and Benaroya were dead. In the summer of 1914, the First World War broke out. We're not going to go through the whole explanation, I've already done that 3 times. What's important to know right now is that the mood in Greece was very pro-war. Greece's closest ally was Serbia, the very first victim of Central Powers' aggression. Prime Minister Venizelos was eager to strengthen diplomatic ties to Britain and France, and when the Ottoman Empire declared war that December, joining the Entente was an obvious path to acquire more majority Greek territory in the Aegean and Anatolia. But there were also significant forces against war, the most powerful being King Konstantinos himself, a German sympathizer married to the sister of the German emperor, and his opposition to war was largely followed by right-wing opposition parties. But there are other forces against the war as well, probably the most important being the military. Just before the outbreak of war, Army Chief of Staff Ioannis Metaxas had performed a study of Greek military readiness and concluded that Greece wasn't remotely ready for a war against anyone and would almost certainly lose if they tried. Metaxas concluded that it was best to start building up strength now in order to protect Greek neutrality. So for the most part, the anti-war forces were conservative monarchists. Then there was the Federacion. Like the Bund up in the Russian Empire, the Federacion had taken liberal inspiration from Austrian movements like autonomism and Austro-Marxism, and weren't keen to take up arms against their ideological colleagues. And unlike the old Greek socialists down south, the proletariat of Thessaloniki had witnessed the horrors of the Balkan Wars firsthand, which reinforced the party's strong aversion to militarism. But at the end of the day, Venizelos was right. War was coming. In early 1915, Prime Minister Venizelos agreed to allow British and French forces to occupy the island of Lemnos to use as a staging ground for the upcoming invasion of Gallipoli. Incensed over this apparent violation of Greece's neutrality, the king forced Venizelos to resign in favor of the conservative, pro-neutrality Dimitrios Gounaris and called new elections. With liberals and conservatives already fully polarized over the war issue, both sides looked to the left to secure their electoral fortunes, and in so doing normalized socialist politics to a degree never before seen in Greece. While Venizelos fully absorbed the old Greek socialists into the Liberal Party, the conservative Gounaris reached out to Benaroya to form a left-right alliance, and that June, the Federacion actually elected 2 members of parliament. However, the election was still a resounding victory for Venizelos, who returned as prime minister, and if he couldn't bring Greece into the Entente, he was going to get as close as possible. On the 3rd of October, Venizelos once again acquiesced to Allied demands to occupy Thessaloniki in order to secure a land route to Serbia, and once again the king ordered his resignation. 11 days later, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers and declared war on Serbia. Remember when I said that Serbia was Greece's closest ally? Well, that alliance was specifically a defensive pact against Bulgaria, yet Greece did nothing. At the same time, King Konstantinos tried and failed to cobble together his own government, only to lose a confidence vote leading to the dissolution of parliament. Though opposed in most other matters, both Benaroya and Venizelos denounced the move as unconstitutional and boycotted the subsequent elections that December. But the final straw came in May of 1916, when the king acquiesced to German and Bulgarian demands to surrender control of Fort Rupel in order to attack the Allies in Macedonia. This was a national outrage, and in August, liberal paramilitaries launched a civil war in all but name. Venizelos set up a provisional government in Thessaloniki, while the British and French navies assisted fighting in the south against royalist forces under Lieutenant Colonel Metaxas. The ensuing stalemate lasted 10 months. Finally, in June 1917, King Konstantinos abdicated, Venizelos' government was restored in Athens, and the reunited Kingdom of Greece officially declared war on the Central Powers. While the Federacion had continued to oppose the war during the National Schism, all of these events did push them back towards Venizelos and the liberals. Both parties had agreed to boycott the December 1915 election. Thessaloniki, the party's main power base, had been the headquarters of the Allied occupation and the provisional capital of Venizelos' rebel government. And as the war continued, Venizelos and the socialists came to need each other more and more. By mid-1917, Allied victory in Europe was by no means assured, or even in clear view. But the defeat of the Ottomans was starting to be. Mindful of the coming post-war order, Venizelos saw the Federacion as an essential tool with which non-Greek minority groups could be more easily integrated into Greek society after the future annexation of Ottoman territory. The Federación, in turn, was afraid of losing its voters. As Ottoman defeat became increasingly tangible, a growing number of the Jewish proletariat was becoming active in the rival Zionist movement, which Venizelos' government was actively courting. If the Federación wanted to maintain their popularity, they needed to work with Venizelos. But any lingering antipathy between the two parties came to an abrupt end later that summer. On the 18th of August, a massive fire broke out which destroyed nearly half of Thessaloniki, leaving 72,000 residents homeless, including 3/4 of the city's Jewish population, finally compelling the Federación to unofficially join the coalition to better assist in humanitarian aid. Returning the favor, the Greek Foreign Ministry actively sent Federación politicians as part of the Greek delegation to the Inter-Allied Socialist Congress in London. Finally, in July 1918, with the end of the war finally in sight, Benaroya and Venizelos met to make a formal agreement. Venizelos would give his blessing to Benaroya and the Federación to unite the various labor movements in Greece into a single confederation and to bring together the various socialist factions into a single party. In exchange, that new party would be tasked with lobbying the Socialist International to support Greece's post-war territorial claims. So in September, Benaroya presided over the Pan-Hellenic Labor Congress in Athens, which resulted in the establishment of the General Confederation of Greek Workers, the main body representing private sector workers in Greece to this day. Then in December, with the war officially over, he attended the Socialist Congress in nearby Piraeus, where an agreement was reached to dissolve the Federación and merge it into the new Socialist Labor Party of Greece. In the absence of an independent Federación, multiple Jewish autonomist parties continued to form and even win seats in parliament, but they were short-lived and their impact was minimal. In just 10 years, Avram Benaroya had played a key part in the integration of a massive Jewish population into a country known for high levels of anti-Semitism. He'd worked with the liberals to achieve socialist goals in wartime without ever having to compromise. And he'd brought left-wing politics fully into the Greek mainstream for the foreseeable future. This should have been his triumph. Instead, it was his undoing. By this time, a new power was emerging in Eastern Europe: the Bolsheviks. Like the original Bund in Russia, Benaroya and the Federación had always been fierce opponents of the Bolsheviks. But the prospect of a rising socialist power proved irresistible to many of the newer members of the Socialist Workers' Party. In July 1920, the party withdrew from the Socialist International in favor of the Moscow-backed Communist International. And in 1923, Benaroya and most veteran leaders of the Federación were expelled from the party for their opposition to Bolshevism. The remainder of Benaroya's life was largely marked by tragedy. His son was killed in the Italo-Greek War of 1940. The following year, Germany and Italy invaded Greece. In 1942, Benaroya was arrested for his role in the resistance and deported to the Tittmoning and later Laufen prisoner of war camps in Bavaria, which ended up saving his life. His remaining family were killed at Auschwitz, and he returned to his adopted country in late 1945, alone and largely forgotten. Though the dream of an Ottoman socialist federation had long since faded away, Benaroya still found himself clinging to the traditional Bundist opposition to Zionism when Israel gained independence in 1948. But curiosity finally got the better of him. In 1952, he visited the young country for the first time, and the following year he settled there permanently. In the wider world, he wrote passionate essays on the history of the Jews of Thessaloniki, the rise and fall of the Federación, and the Jewish resistance against the Nazis in Greece, all the while living in poverty and anonymity as a kiosk worker in the Tel Aviv suburb of Holon. He died aged 92 in 1979. Special thanks to my patrons, including Mir Akbar Ali, Jeremy Biskin, Boris Cherny, FC, Matthew Feinberg, Jay Fleischman, Osher Gordon, Bob Huddy, Raphael Kellerman, Jacob Kossoff, Eric Liederman, Jeffrey Schweitzer, and Ian York.